Hello, and welcome to this week's Bible study. This week, we're talking a little bit about what it means to be a prophet and prophecy in sort of general, and how we can determine if someone claims to be a prophet, if they're really speaking on behalf of the Lord. First of all, prophets are one who speak the word of the Lord. They don't make prophecies in the way that we think of them today, but a prophet is just one who speaks on behalf of the Lord. You might use the word seer, right? For one who sees the future. And although prophets do sometimes see in the near-term future, they don't like look in a crystal ball and see the distant future necessarily in the Old Testament. So what exactly does a prophet do, or how can you tell who a prophet is? Well, the first model that we have, he's a prophet, he's a judge, he's a lawgiver, he's all kinds of things. And of course, I'm talking about Moses. And Moses, as he speaks to the people, says this: "The Lord your God will raise up for you a prophet like me from among your own people. You shall heed such a prophet. This is what you requested of the Lord your God at Horeb," it's a mountain, "on the day of the assembly, when you said, 'If I hear the voice of the Lord my God any more, or ever again see this great fire, I will die.' Then the Lord replied to me, 'They are right in what they have said. I will raise up for them a prophet like you,'" this is the Lord speaking to Moses. "I will raise up for them a prophet like you from among their own people. I will put my words in the mouth of the prophet, who shall speak to them everything that I command. Anyone who does not heed the words that the prophet shall speak in my name, I myself will hold accountable. But any prophet who speaks in the name of other gods, or who presumes to speak in my name a word that I have not commanded the prophet to speak, that prophet shall die. You may say to yourself, 'How can we recognize a word that the Lord has not spoken?' If a prophet speaks in the name of the Lord, but the thing does not take place or prove true, it is a word that the Lord has not spoken. The prophet has spoken it presumptuously. Do not be frightened by it." So, in other words, how can you tell if someone who claims to be a prophet is actually a prophet? Well, one way is if they tell you to go commit adultery, they're not a prophet, right? They wouldn't break God's commandments, right? That's the first way you can tell. The second way you can tell is if they say, "Oh, within the next 2 years, the king of Babylon shall be gone from this place, and his armies shall have receded," and then they don't, well, then that person's not really a prophet. So Jeremiah 28, the prophet Hananiah opposes the prophet Jeremiah. Jeremiah says, "Get comfortable. The Babylonian armies are here to stay." And Hananiah says, "Nah, they'll be gone." Hananiah is dead within a year. Hananiah was a false prophet. Jeremiah was the real prophet. And Jeremiah will say, I've given this word of the Lord, and I don't want to speak it because no one wants to hear it. But when I don't speak it, it burns like a fire in my bones, and fire in my bones, and I have to speak it. The prophet Ezekiel will be told, God will tell the prophet Ezekiel, if I give you a message of warning, and you give it to the people, and they ignore you, well, that's their fault. But if I give you a word of warning for the people, and you don't give it to them, that's your fault. Pardon me. So, when we talk about prophets and prophecy, right? It's important to realize that prophets and prophecy, if they don't show up quite so directly, they're at least referenced in the New Testament. Jesus says this is the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount, at the end of the Beatitudes. "Blessed are you when people revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you." And in general, the prophets have it rough. There are a few exceptions. Isaiah seems to have been a court prophet, worked directly for the king, generally spoke words of comfort at times of calamity. I'm thinking, of course, of Isaiah 7 and Isaiah 35. But he seems to be the exception, not the rule. Ezekiel is told not to mourn for his wife. Jeremiah is told he's not allowed to get married. Those two especially had it pretty rough. And they weren't the only ones, right? So in Matthew 23, Jesus is talking to the scribes and the Pharisees here. I've cut to the end of the, shall we call it an exhortation. You snakes, you brood of vipers, how can you escape being sentenced to hell? Therefore I send you prophets, sages, and scribes, some of whom you will kill and crucify, and some you will flog in your synagogues and pursue from town to town, so that upon you may come all the righteous blood shed on earth, from the blood of righteous Abel to the blood of Zechariah son of Barachiah, whom you murdered between the sanctuary and the altar. Now, who exactly is Jesus talking about? Well, we're not sure, but this is our best guess. From 2 Chronicles 24, starting in verse 19. Yet he, the Lord, sent prophets among them to bring them back to the Lord. The prophets testified against the people, but the people would not listen. Then the Spirit of God took possession of Zechariah, son of the priest Jehoiada. He stood above the people and said to them, Thus says God, why do you transgress the commandments of the Lord, so that you cannot prosper? Because you have forsaken the Lord, he has also forsaken you. But they conspired against him, and by the command of the king they stoned him to death in the court of the house of the Lord. Being a prophet, speaking the word of the Lord is not often popular, and the prophets often get it in the neck, sometimes literally. As I will mention in my sermon on Sunday, Jeremiah spent some time at the bottom, or maybe that was in my devotion Tuesday or Wednesday. Anyway, I mentioned recently that Jeremiah spent some time in a cistern, which is sort of an ancient well. It's where you stored water. And not a place you want to spend some time as a human being. But Jeremiah spent some time down there. The prophets do not have it easy. And again, as Jesus will reference here in Luke 13, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to it. How often have I desired to gather your children together as a hen gathers her brood under her wings, and you were not willing. Being a prophet is rough. Anyone who claims to be a prophet or claims to want to be a prophet, I think doesn't really understand what it means to be a prophet. That is all I have for us today for the Bible study on prophets and prophecy. Hope that you'll come back and join us again next week.